Hey guys, welcome back to another tier list video. Today, as you can see, I'll be ranking the films of Tony Scott. So this guy is obviously the brother of Ridley Scott, who's another of my favourite directors. I never got into Tony Scott too much until more recently because I'd only seen a handful of his films, but I decided to go back and watch a lot of the movies that I hadn't seen yet and really found myself enjoying a lot of his work. So he's very different from Ridley Scott, who makes kind of these big, epic, theatrical movies, whereas Tony Scott's definitely more of an action blockbuster type guy who just puts his pedal to the metal and just, for flat out entertainment purposes rather than trying to make like some big wide scope kind of Academy Award film, you know what I mean? In the way that Ridley Scott does. So it's kind of cool that you've got these two brothers who make great movies but very different films from each other. And so yeah, Tony Scott's made a total of 16 films, and unfortunately he did commit suicide after making Unstoppable in 2010, so we weren't able to get any more movies from him, which would have been awesome to see what he would have gone on to do after that, because his style was really going somewhere special and cool, I think, by that time period. So anyway, he did start way back in the 80s, so we have 16 films to go through, and these are in no particular order. And I have recently just finished watching all of his films, so we'll jump into this tier list. And starting off with a really good film, and one of my personal favourites that I've seen recently is The Last Boy Scout from 1991. This is one of my top 5, probably Tony Scott films, sorry. It came out in 1991, and it's kind of in the vein of films like Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, where it's like a buddy cop action comedy adventure kind of film, and it's very violent and over the top and crazy, but so much fun. It's definitely a high, solid A tier film for me. Bruce Willis was really good and really funny in it, and Marlon Wayans was alright. I just really enjoyed the action and the over the top kind of violence in the film, and it was, like I said, it was also quite funny and had some really good moments and some really dark stuff too, but overall it was a really fun and entertaining film. And going back through his filmography, it's actually the first film he made that I really liked. Like, I wasn't really a fan of the stuff he did in the 80s or prior to this movie. So this is the first really good Tony Scott film, in my opinion. So next up, we have a film called Revenge, which came out just 1 year before The Last Boy Scout. And as I said, I didn't really like much of what he did before that film, including Revenge. I thought it was one of his weaker movies. It stars Kevin Costner, who's an actor that I really like, and he was playing against type in this film as more of a sleazy, villainous kind. But it's a typical kind of cliched revenge thriller where a guy falls in love with a friend's wife or mistress and runs away with her, but then has to pay the consequences and comes back for revenge. But it wasn't as exciting as I thought it could have been. It was kind of average, to be honest. I'll put it in the C tier because it did have some enjoyable parts, but overall, I just wasn't that huge on it. Next up, we have Crimson Tide. This is another really good film. Most people say this is like top 3, probably, or definitely in their top 5 Tony Scott films, and it is a very entertaining film. Another one that I'd probably put on par with The Last Boy Scout, so I'll put that in A tier as well. And it's the first film he did with Denzel Washington. They went on to make a total of 5 films together. And Gene Hackman as well, who he went on to work with in Enemy of the State, which we'll get to next. But yeah, this is just a really solid submarine thriller film. And I really like submarine films because it's like these enclosed spaces underwater, so it's already tense. And then you're putting more pressure on by putting people at odds with each other. And I've just really started enjoying like a lot of the submarine films that I've been watching recently, and this is definitely one of the better ones. So yeah, Denzel was great as always. Gene Hackman was really good, super entertaining, very fun. Most of Tony Scott's films are just, like, when they're at their peak, they're just entertaining the whole way through. They're fun, they have great action, great characters and dialogue and chemistry and all that, and Crimson Tide is definitely one of those movies. So next up we have Enemy of the State. And this is another great 90s film that Tony Scott did, another one with Gene Hackman, but also starring Will Smith. And this is a film that I remember watching probably like 10 years ago. I think it was actually the first Tony Scott film I saw, and I really loved this movie. And I actually hadn't watched it pretty much since then until a couple of weeks ago. I decided to go back and rewatch it on Blu-ray. And man, it's such a good film. Like, Enemy of the State is definitely one of my favorite Ridley Scott films. I guess you could put it under the category of like a surveillance thriller. with films like The Conversation, which Gene Hackman was also in years ago. But it's a really entertaining movie, and it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of action. It's never boring or dull. It's definitely an S tier film for me. I think that Will Smith gives one of his best early performances. The scenes that Gene Hackman's in, he's really good. The film is just constantly intense and building towards its ending. And the action's great. Like, yeah, everything about this movie I really like. It's just a super entertaining film from start to finish, and really makes you think about society and the surveillance system as it was back here, which was in 1998. You know, a good 25 years ago, and just to think how much further it's probably come now is just kind of a scary thought as well. So, Enemy of the State's definitely one of his best films. So next up we have Top Gun. So this is a classic 1980s film, and it was only Tony Scott's second film. It stars Tom Cruise in one of his biggest roles. I've never been that huge of a fan of Top Gun. I just think it's good. I know a lot of people think it's great and iconic and one of the 80s classics, and it is. But for me personally, I've never thought of it as some incredible kind of staple film of the 80s. I just enjoy it for what it is. So I'm going to put it in the B tier because I just think it's okay. Like, I mean, not okay, it's good. It's definitely better than like Revenge and those C tier films that I'm going to put out. But it's, for me, it's not like a personal favorite or anything. I really like the recent sequel that it got a lot more than the original. But the original film is still fine. It's solid. And then we got Days of Thunder, which is another Tom Cruise film that they did together, but with race cars. It kind of felt like they were trying to recreate what they'd done with Top Gun again, but with Formula One cars, and it just didn't work. And I wasn't a fan of that movie, really. I kind of put it in the same tier as Revenge. They came out the same year, and I just was very underwhelmed with both of those movies. So again, they're not bad films, but they're just definitely C tier films. They're just kind of run-of-the-mill average movies. So next up we have a more recent film in his career, keeping in mind his career did end with his 2010 film Unstoppable. So when I say recent, I mean later on in his career. So Deja Vu came out in 2006, and it was another collaboration with Denzel Washington. And it's kind of like a little bit science fiction-y because it goes into time travel a little bit, but it's also a bit of a surveillance thriller as well, like Enemy of the State, but a bit more fantastical. And it surrounds this kind of bombing that occurs on a ferry in New Orleans. And I really loved this movie. Like, I hadn't seen it ever, and then a couple weeks ago I still had a couple Tony Scott films to get through and watch, and this was one of them that I hadn't seen. And wow, I was like blown away by this film. I really hadn't heard that much about it as far as rave goes, or top Tony Scott films or anything like that, but I really loved it, and it's like probably in my top 3 or 4 of his films. And I actually went out and bought it on Blu-ray like straight after as well, which tells you how much I liked it, because it's definitely another S tier film for me. I'd even put it, like I said, above Boy Scout and Crimson Tide. It was just another one that's so entertaining and so fun, has a unique and fresh kind of idea and story. And you've got a really good performance from Washington, as well as Jim Caviezel, who plays the villain in the film. And it had a cool setting in New Orleans. Like, I love films that are kind of set in the South. And yeah, just a really unique kind of spin on, I guess, what Minority Report kind of delved into a little bit with pre-crime and seeing things before they actually happen and stuff like that. So that was definitely an entertaining part of it, and really liked that movie a lot. Next up we have Domino, which is another one that he made around this time in 2005, I think, and this is based on a true story of a female bounty hunter. And this film just didn't really click with me. It's kind of at the bottom of a lot of people's lists, and I kind of see why after watching it, because it goes into his style that he kind of did with Man of Fire, where there's lots of quick cutting and there's lots of almost shaky cam and just weird effects going on in the editing. But this kind of dials it up to a 10. And it didn't really work for me, to be honest. Like, it was entertaining enough, and it was pretty crazy as far as the story goes and the characters and things like that. But overall, I was just kind of let down by it. Like, it started off strong enough, but it kind of lost me, and yeah, got weaker as the film went on. So it's another one that I would put in the C tier, just kind of an average movie. Next up, we have Beverly Hills Cop 2. So this was only one of the first films that he did, like just after Top Gun, I think, in the 80s. And obviously a sequel to the original classic, which is a really good movie. And as far as sequels go, it's actually pretty good. It's another one that I'm going to put up in the B tier with Top Gun. It was entertaining, it was funny, it did its job, but it was, at the end of the day, it wasn't like some amazing film that deserved to be up in the S or A tier or anything like that. It was good for what it was, but it's Beverly Hills Cop 2. It was, I guess, what you'd expect, but actually probably better than most people would expect a sequel like that to be. The action was quite good, the humor was funny, but yeah, it wasn't like a super memorable or amazing film or anything like that. So it's definitely a solid B tier movie. Next up, we have Man on Fire. So this movie is easily one of his best films. To be honest, everything that I have in the S tier is probably interchangeable, so I'm going to put Man on Fire up in the S tier as well. This film has that kind of quick, intense, over-the-top cutting style that Domino has, but not as bad as Domino. So it can get a little bit annoying sometimes when it just like continues throughout the whole film, which is probably my only critique of the movie, because as far as everything else goes, story is great, super engaging, great characters. Again, Denzel Washington here. You've got a young Dakota Fanning here as the girl who is kidnapped. A very fun, violent, and over-the-top revenge thriller in the vein of films like Taken. But yeah, just a super great film, and so entertaining, so fun, very violent, as I said. But yeah, it's just got that strange kind of editing style that Domino has, which I think is the one thing that throws people off of this movie. But other than that, it's a really great film. And yeah, I think that the editing is probably its only weakness, even though it's not too bad and not as bad as Domino, but it probably is a little bit too much for what it needed to be. But still, definitely a solid S tier film. I really loved Man on Fire. So next we have Spy Game. I don't remember a whole lot about this movie. I saw it a few years ago when I was watching all of Brad Pitt's films, and I remember enjoying it enough, but not thinking it was like amazing or anything. It's kind of like about an older spy recounting his missions with the younger spy, who is Brad Pitt, just before his retirement and stuff like that. I remember it being decent enough and interesting enough, but not to the point where I would say, oh wow, this is like an amazing movie or anything. So it feels like another solid B tier film for me, to be honest. So it's good, but not great. And that probably goes for The Fan as well. I know a lot of people don't like this movie. It seems to get a lot of hate because it's pretty silly and over the top. But I feel like The Fan is another solid B tier film. I did enjoy it. Robert De Niro is quite good at playing these roles of crazy, over the top, evil kind of characters. I think he perfected it though with Cape Fear, the Martin Scorsese film, which is like leaps and bounds better than this movie. But I still enjoyed The Fan enough to put it in the B tier. It was a very entertaining movie for what it was, even though it was over the top and silly at the same time. It was still decent enough. So next up we have the second to last film that he made, The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. This is another recent one that I saw for the first time. I think it's based on a true story of a train in the New York subway system that was kidnapped, or taken, not kidnapped, but hijacked, by a group of terrorists. And again, this one stars Denzel Washington, and you've also got John Travolta here as the villain. This movie kind of gets a lot of hate because it's a remake of a classic film from the 70s, I think. I haven't seen the original, so I think that helped with my enjoyment of this film. But I thought it was fine. I didn't think there was anything particularly wrong with it. I'd heard a lot of bad things about it, so I wasn't kind of expecting it to be anything special, but I did enjoy it enough to probably say it's another solid B tier film. So I'll put it up in the B tier, probably just below Top Gun, because like I said, I enjoyed it more than I was expecting to from reviews and things like that. But I think sometimes when you have a remake that is remade of a classic film, it really helps if you haven't seen that original film, because you have nothing to compare it to. But even still, I can't imagine it being awful after seeing the original film, because it was fine, it was enjoyable, there was nothing wrong with it particularly. So next up we have the first film that Tony Scott made in 1983, The Hunger, which is kind of like an erotic vampire thriller romance film. It's very different from anything else he's made. It's very subdued and almost feels like an early Ridley Scott film. So that was interesting. And it also has a performance from David Bowie, who's in the first part of the movie, and Susan Sarandon's in the film as well. And unfortunately, I didn't really like this movie. It's easily, in my opinion, it was his weakest film, but then again, it's his first movie, so it's kind of expected as well. But there was nothing really that kind of engaged me or hooked me in the film in any way. Again, I don't think it's like an awful movie. It wasn't poorly made or poorly acted or anything like that, so I'm not going to put it in the F tier, but I think it's a D tier film for me. Personally, I know there are people that like this, but it just wasn't for me, personally. So coming down to the last two, we have two of his best films now. And the first one here is True Romance from 1993. So this is a great film, and this is often cited as Tony Scott's best film. It was based off of a Quentin Tarantino script, so Tarantino had written the film. I think he was going to direct it, but this was in between Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, so Tony Scott was able to direct this for him. So it kind of feels like this really cool blend of Tony Scott's style and Quentin Tarantino's dialogue, which is really cool. And the film just works so well. Like, I haven't seen it for a few years, but I really have to see it again. I actually want to get it on 4K because it looks like a really great transfer, and I'd love to watch it again. But it's easily like up the top of the S tier. Like I said though, all these S tier films for me are pretty much equal, so don't worry about the order that I have them in here. But yeah, True Romance is a great film. Great performances from Christian Slater and Patricia Arquette, as well as smaller performances from like Dennis Hooper and who else is in it? Christopher Walken. Brad Pitt's got a small role in the film as well. So it's just a very fun, very entertaining film. If you can imagine Tony Scott's style, which is very energetic and just entertaining and fast-paced and lots of action mixed with Quentin Tarantino's amazing dialogue, it kind of just combined to make this really amazing film in the early 90s, which really launched his career in a big way, I feel like. So last but not least, we have Unstoppable, which actually was his final film in 2010, and I just watched this about a week ago for the first time, and I really enjoyed this movie a lot. It's definitely another A tier film for me. It's not quite an S tier film, but I'm going to put it here, just in between Boy Scout and Crimson Tide. So this was based on another true story, I think, where there's like pretty much a runaway train, and it's got all this toxic material on it. It's heading towards small villages and towns, and so it's about these other train conductors, one of them being Denzel Washington, and they have to stop this train before it causes like a huge catastrophe kind of, and like wipes out a whole town. And it was very entertaining. It was very fun. It was very fast paced. It's only like an hour and a half long or something, but it has great performances. It's got Tony Scott's style all over it, and it was just really good to see that his last film was really solid and really entertaining and kind of like worked with most viewers and critics. So like I said, it's quite sad that he wasn't able to go on and make more films, because I think he would have just kept going in this style and making really good movies over the past decade and a half. But thankfully he did go out with a bang though with Unstoppable, and that was a great movie. Really enjoyed it, so would definitely recommend that one too. So that's all of his films, guys. I think there's 16 in total. I loved the S and A tier films. The B tier films were all good. Wasn't a huge fan on those 3 C tier ones or The Hunger, but it'd be interesting to know what you guys think of these movies. So if you have seen them or haven't seen some of them, please comment below and we'll chat. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in my next video.